Nancy, would you prefer that I use this microphone and this only for? Okay, if you do have a question, I'll be running around finding you and giving you an opportunity to say it so that everybody can hear it. My name is Larry Ruth. I'm a member of the church here. I'm also a member of the Lower Platte South Natural Resources District, and that's how come one of the reasons I've known Dave for a while. But we do appreciate your being here. It's such a wonderful day and an evening, for you to give up your evening to be here. That's really, we're very thankful for that. Just a little bit about what we are. We have a group here called Earth Stewards. Stewardship, taking care of, well, ours is taking care of natural resources. And we started it as a discussion group. You know, sometimes you start things kind of slow to see if it's going to catch on. And it started slow and it caught on very well with folks interested in various aspects of Earth stewardship. We started this discussion group that was focused a little bit probably on global warming, but then that evolved into a lot more. Fortunately, at the same time, one of our members here, Steve Schaefer, was involved with making the outside of the inside of the perimeter a large garden, and we call it the gardens. These pictures are all, not that one, but the critter cameras and all the pictures we have are from our videographer on our own grounds. The Earth Stewards examined a number of issues for a while, all internal, and then we started to have people visiting with us, and we've had some folks that have been very well versed in the area of the issue of the day. We decided to have a 4-part series on 4 issues, or general issues, and they were in January on solar energy, February on electric vehicles, March on water with the Water Institute, and then April, where we decided to look at it a little bit differently and have the Natural Resources District featured. It is one of the gems, we think, of our government system, and there's no one better than Dave Landis to talk about it. And you know, there's Dean Acheson was Secretary of State shortly after World War II, and he wrote a book called Present at the Creation, meaning the creation of the European alliance with the United States. And I'd like to look at Dave as sort of present at the creation, because he was a member of the predecessor organization that evolved into the Natural Resources District, but maybe he can comment on that just a little bit. And finally, he gets to the apex. He gets the chairmanship of the NRD board, finally. I knew Dave as a young state senator back in the 70s, and then in our working together on a number of legislative issues. He's been the chair of a couple of very important committees in the legislature, both revenue and banking, commerce, and insurance. He's a thespian. That's how he knows Jan. And he's a musician, teacher. Teaches at, Harvard and several others in a roundabout way. I mean, he taught.
Doane, Wesleyan, and the law school.
And the law school, okay. He's a lawyer with a very wonderful reputation as being someone in the legislature who always worked to improve the jurisprudence of the state. So tonight we're going to be exploring Natural Resources District. It's Natural Resources, plural, district, and the way that that fits into the system of husbanding, or stewarding our resources. And Dave, I'll let you know that the very first speech I ever gave was as a freshman in high school, when I gave a speech on what the Soil and Water Conservation District means to me. Dave Landis.
In 1972, I got elected to the Soil and Water Conservation District for this county, and it was from that position that I moved on to the NRD shortly thereafter. A delight to be here. I want to talk about the NRD, but I want to take a focus. After I do a little refresher on what we do, I want to pat us on the back for something that we did well, and then I want to give us a stern talking to about something that we need to get on with as promptly as possible. The NRD was formed in 1972. Ours, one of 23 in the state, is parts of 6 counties. And when I say parts of 6 counties, that's what makes Nebraska different than every other state. Many states have organizations that have responsibilities for natural resources districts, or resources, but they use the pre-existing boundaries of political subdivisions, like counties. What we do in our NRDs is we follow river basins. The river basins contain the interconnected tissue of what the problems are. The political boundaries of Saunders County and Cass County can have 2 or 3 different river basins in them and not be a good measure at all. So we are ahead of the general practice around the country by thinking in terms of the natural resource reality rather than the pre-existing political reality. Ours has 1 million acres of land. We have 350,000 people. We have 85% of our land is rural. 90% of our people are in urban areas. We have 200 flood control dams. We got 13 miles of levee, and that's worth talking about because they're not uniformly as strong or as effective as we would like them to be. We have 12 miles of urban streams. That means running water in Lincoln, Nebraska, where there are streams that we probably don't think of. But Dead Man's Run and Beals Slough and Antelope Creek are examples. We have 50 miles of trails that we're responsible for, and we have 9 wildlife management areas, all of which are in the service of the tasks that we do. Let me see. I hope that I am striking this arrow. I am pushing the arrow. It's not doing anything, but I'm pushing it.
Oh, hang on, I know how to fix that.
Oh, do you? Okay, good. Oh, good. Then this is what needs to be fixed instead of me. Good, excellent. The NRDs, I fully believe that God is love. What a splendid note. Not on my PowerPoint, but perhaps it should have been there. I'm ready? Okay, excellent. These are among the statutory obligations for what an NRD is supposed to be concerned about. We have authority in this area. However, it is up to each NRD to pick out the ones from this list to give more priority to than others. So let me show you the priorities for our NRD, because our NRD thinks that groundwater, both quality and quantity, is very, very important. And then secondly on our list is flood control, and that's the focus of tonight's talk. We want bank stabilization so that we don't have erosion with our rivers or the despoiling of the rivers and making them less clean. We do a lot of work in the recreation field because many of those dams have lakes, and those lakes are available for kayaking and swimming and boating under circumstances, as well as the fact that you don't have to have a certificate or a permit to use our lakes, free of charge when you go to an NRD lake. So those are the priorities that we have. We spend $31 million. Most of it comes from the federal government, some from the state. 27% of our money comes from local property tax. So that's $11 million of property taxes. The rest of the $31 million come from other entities that assist us. Tonight I want to focus, however, on, as I said, the issue of flooding. If you want to know where our 6 counties are, this is where we are. We have a total of 21 district representatives, and these are some of the things that we do. But this is the focus of I want to talk about tonight, and that is significant projects. Because the first thing that I get to talk about is a success. It's a success for the Antelope Valley Project. I think the most obvious way of thinking about it and seeing it in your mind's eye is the drive down O Street that now has a couple of beautiful bridges that overlook a beautiful park, a linear park, that has a waterway in the middle of that park. It passes right by the Assurity Insurance Company, and that water was always there, but it was underground in a box culvert. We now have lifted it up and increased the ability of that to hold water. What that did was it made the Antelope Valley, or Antelope Creek, able to handle more water safely than what was there before. When we got done with the project, and it was expensive, but most of the money was federal, we took a bunch of acres and buildings and homes out of the floodplain, out of the risk of a 100-year flood, or a 1% flood, it's called. 800 structures, business and residential, came out of the project. There were several thousands of people who lived in that area who were living in homes that were subject to the flooding of a 1% flood. And we made all of that came out of what happened was the floodplain narrowed to that river, if you will. It also took 600 square blocks out of the floodplain. And so that's where Antelope Creek runs, and it now has much better control than it did at the time. This is worth looking at. That's the bridge that I was referring to. But down right was the high water mark in the 2015 real powerful rainstorm. We got 7 inches in a less than 24-hour period. That is a great deal of water. And if you see that, you'll notice that it has risen all the way up to the bottom of that bridge. That's what you're looking at the bottom right picture. All the rest of that vale is filled now with water. And what the Lincoln Journal said when they ran that picture on the front page, it said, "It works." That was the title. The part of the story that didn't get covered nearly as well is the South Bottoms. The South Bottoms was under 4 feet of water in that same storm. Rowboats were making their way up and down the streets of the South Bottoms. Not the North Bottoms, the Salt Valley levee held, but in the South Bottoms we had serious, serious flooding. Now, there were other things that happened because of the Antelope Valley. We spent $246 million, a lot of money, but most of it federal. We got a whole new transportation system that you use when you take the interstate and now come into the football game, or you try to get to Innovation Campus, and that has quickened and speeded up and made much more traversable a great deal of the interior of the city's transportation system. We got this flood control that worked, and we got community revitalization. The Assurity project is only one of a number of projects that have been done in that field. You have to drive the neighborhood to realize that there are more than 200 new units of housing in that neighborhood, which used to be in the floodplain district and therefore couldn't have gotten loans, but now are built in that neighborhood because it is safe, from at least more safe than it used to be. It was 20 years in the making. The city was one of the partners, the university was another partner, and the NRD was a third. And that is a model for what we'll be doing in the future, which is working with others. In that 2015 race, we had 4 inches of rain in 2 to 3 hours and 7 inches of rain in 4.5 hours. 7.3 inches would be the conditions that we normally think of as flooding, the standard for flooding. So we were just this close to flooding in the Salt Creek area, we were 6 inches away from the top of the levee. That's how close we were to flooding in the North Bottoms and in Belmont and in that area and onto the university campus. That's a success in the Antelope Valley. What's not as good a story is Salt Creek. Salt Creek used to have a very good system of protection because we built in the 60s a handful, about a dozen large-scale water-controlled dams. And they are, for the most part, surrounding the city, and many of them were done by the old Salt Valley watershed, predated the NRD. We built that, and at that time we had protection for a 1% flood. We say a 100-year flood. That's because that's 1% per year. The real way of saying it is that it's a 1% flood. That was the case in the late 60s. And the levee that we built was part of that same system. Today, our protection in that location is probably a 2% flood or a 50-year flood plus 2 feet of water. How likely is that to occur? Even though it says a 2% flood, we shouldn't think of that as 50 years. The best indications I can get from experts who will go out on a limb say, given what we have and the amount of protection we have, we are likely to have a flooding event in Salt Creek in 30 years. It's someplace in the next 30 years. And I don't know when that 8-inch rainstorm is going to be here, but when that 8-inch rainstorm occurs, whenever it does, we'll be over the levee and we'll be into, our best guess is about 1,300 buildings, about 6,000 people, and about $1 billion of property, because that's where the water is going to go when it goes over that levee, if it occurs. And you might think to yourself, why don't we just build the levee higher? Which is a great idea. We can't. And one of the reasons is Lincoln is a pro-development town. We like businesses to build and expand and jobs to be created. So when we have that levee, we have a section in which it comes back down, because there's the levee and there's Salt Creek, right? Here's the levee, and then it comes down to a flatter ground. We allow development to grow up to the edge of that where it flattens out. If you did a higher levee, you would go higher up, and therefore it would take a much more space to flatten out. And that flattening out was taken up by new development, new buildings, and new structures. We didn't think we'd ever have to raise the levee higher than what it was, so we didn't plan ahead to give ourselves space to raise the levee if we wanted to. So that option that you might think would be available, just to get some more sandbags, build it up higher, won't work. And it won't work because we've allowed development to occur too close to Salt Creek. Well, what faces us if we have these chances for an 8-inch rainstorm to come up? We had a study done called the Salt Creek Floodplain Resiliency Study, done by Brian Dunnigan, and it's a really marvelous publication. But it's filled with a lot of stuff that slowed down how hard the message is, because it does indicate, places that we could go. But there aren't a lot of places where we can easily think of things to do that would have a significant effect. If we were to build large-scale dams, we'd be talking $200 million plus. And we'd have to get the land, and we'd have to condemn it, and we'd have to use eminent domain, and we would have a fight on our hands with pitchforks and torches down at City Hall from people saying, you can't take our land. We need that for our well-being. And there's a lot of sympathy for that. And even if we did, all those dams wouldn't be enough to cover the amount of water implicated by the flood that could occur if that was the situation. We could make a significant improvement. That wouldn't be enough. We need to do some other things. Now, some of them we're doing, and congratulations to Lincoln to doing that, but there are some things that other cities have done that we've not done. They've bought back property from private citizens who are willing to sell their land that's in that floodplain. Beatrice has done it, and Ashland has done it. And what they've done is they've taken sections of their city out of the way of flooding by buying up the land and then not developing it, leaving it green. The best thing we can do is generally have more green space. We need to cluster our buildings like a planned unit development, let people build a little higher and construct it on less ground space, and then have more green space, because the green space absorbs the water, unless you're in a drought. And then if you're in a drought, as we have been for several years, the water hits the ground, and the ground is hard and doesn't accept the water. So it just treats it like runoff. One of the things we could do is we could ask people to use permeable concrete. There's concrete that when rain lands on it, it creeps down and goes into the ground below the concrete. We don't do that. Some people are doing it, thank God, but we don't demand it. And you know where the rainwater's coming from, why we're in trouble? Because the situation's getting worse. It's not level, it's worse. And here's why it's worse. It's worse because we have more hot temperatures. The hotter the temperatures, the more air can keep water vapors in the sky. So when the triggering point of the rain occurs, there's now more water up there that falls intensely and torrentially, and we get more water on the ground. So what's happening is our rainstorms are more torrential, they're more water and faster, more intense water. That leads to flooding. And the second thing is we are paving a whole lot of green space. It's driveways and streets and parking lots. I was thrilled to see that the city recently reduced the amount of parking spaces. But here's the risk or the downside. We're not going to require as much land for parking spaces. Good for us. But the people who own that will be able to expand the footprint of their buildings. What we're probably not going to get is less parking lot and more green space. Oh, if only that would happen. That would be a wonderful thing. Every way we can get more green space, the better. And we've done some things. For example, the parking lot next to the Haymarket ball field is purposefully low and is purposely something that by law can't be built on. Why? Because it's a place to hold water when there is a flood. There are 20 locations along the levee where we have land that's going to hold water when it comes. And we're grateful for that. But we're still talking about pieces or puzzle pieces. It's like a 500-piece jigsaw, and we've got about 12 pieces in place, that we've developed recently. And the stuff that we had that was very effective in the 1960s is diminishingly effective today. What are we going to do about it? Well, we're going to consider a number of non-structural things. Buybacks, bigger setbacks so that there's more green space on a plot of land. Cluster developments where we allow buildings to be higher and closer together so there's more green space. Low-impact development like pervious concrete or bioswales. Maybe you've seen them on some of the buildings in town where there's a little crease in the lawn. It's not a perfect lawn. There's a crease where it goes down so that it can hold water and then it can get into the underground dirt from a bioswale. If we demanded those in more locations, that would help us in the same kind of situation. The action going forward is the City of Lincoln and the NRD are working together right now. We've got a consultant in to generate data. The data is necessary to show to FEMA and to the Corps of Engineers if and when we ask for money to build dams or structural leak. So we are bringing a consultant on to help us with the data collection. From the data collection, we do a feasibility study to identify solutions, both structural, dams, and non-structural, green space, pervious pavement, buyback situations, and the like. The feasibility study says, what would it take to get an effective system? Third thing is that we compare the data and the feasibility study for cost benefit. How much will it cost to get us to a place of safety? And the reason is we're going to be in competition with a whole lot of other political subdivisions from around the country for the $20 billion a year that gets let for these kinds of purposes. And to get to that situation, we have to prove that our cost-benefit ratio is very positive, that's very good. So we're going to work on the cost-benefit ratio. Then we look to a financial package. Where would we borrow money? Where could we do bonds? How much would they be? Who would be responsible for them? We would link the sources of money to the cost-benefit data so we can tell the federal government, bang for buck, if they were to give us money to do the kinds of construction that would be helpful with our needs. We also have 4 years for design purposes and 2 years for permitting. If we could move at the rate of a thoroughbred in the Kentucky Derby and all of its speed towards the finish line, we'd get there in 10 years. That's the fastest we could do this. The Antelope Valley Project took us 20 years to do. And it was built on much the same idea. But when it was done, it proved itself to be incredibly successful. We are in the midst of this process now. You're not reading about it in the papers. I bet you haven't heard about it from the pulpit or any other source because it's not something that we've talked about as much as we should. The fact that this group asked me to come and talk tonight makes you two things. First, the first group who's asked to hear this story. And secondly, the most prescient, smartest group that I can imagine in Lincoln, for which you have my congratulations and my thanks. Any questions?
Yes. Does the city own Wilderness Park?
Thank God you asked, because the most expert individual that I can think of is here. What's the answer to that question? Because I don't know it.
The question is, well, I have about 3 questions. If the city owns, does not Salt Creek come into Wilderness Park on the south border of Wilderness Park?
I think it does. Yeah.
Why not build a large pond or a small lake similar, but much smaller than Holmes Lake, on the verge of that southern border of Wilderness Park where Salt Creek comes in?
Splendid idea, and for which I want to give them your name when we focus that out, because it is the torches and pitchforks response from people who love whatever that purpose is. And it wouldn't make a difference. You can give me almost anything that maybe the city owns, maybe on our land. But otherwise, it's going to wind up taking land away from other uses and owners to make it work. It'll be hard. It's a possibility. That's a location. Worth thinking about. You've got 2 more questions.
No, that's it.
Okay.
Well, okay, a comment.
Sure.
We managed to get the south bypass in eventually. I know it took
Yes, it did.
a lot of money and a lot of time.
Yes.
But why couldn't that be done with Salt Creek?
It's my fervent hope, and it will be. It's my we are doing what is allowed to us, the path to get to the resources to make the construction that we need to get now. There's not a faster way of doing this available to us that I know of. So we're proceeding at that rate. But we're in a race against the growing water vapor that's in the sky that seems to be coming down more frequently and more intensity than it used to. Another hand or another question? Yes.
Is there political will out there to do this?
Could you repeat that, please?
Is there political will in the neighborhood
Yeah.
to do what you're talking about, or what's it going to take to change that?
I certainly don't think that it exists today. And one of the reasons to make me say that is, this is the first group who's wanted to hear this story. The first, to my knowledge. It hasn't been covered, I don't think. I mean, there's been some material about it. But in the desire not to be alarmist, this is a wonderful publication. It's that resiliency study. But there's no place in this study that grabs you by the lapels and says, we have half the flood protection that we had in 1960 in the Salt Valley area. We've gone from a 1% flood to a 2% flood, and the conditions aren't moving to make that safer, they're moving the other way. And I don't think it's on the public's radar. When that day comes, I hope that we can step forward. We did on Antelope Valley. No, I think we get to pat ourselves on the back for that one. That was a good idea. And although it was controversial at the time, it was successfully executed. We're in the same process now to do here what was done there. You can't move faster, but it takes a long while. It gives us plenty of time to build up public information and knowledge. I hope we do. I don't think we do at the moment. One more?
Back to the Antelope Creek, I've been noticing Telegraph District, there's some apartments going up around between P and Q Street, right off of Antelope Creek. Is there an organization that's keeping an eye on that to make sure that we're, you were talking about the green space, it's looking like we're starting to build the concrete parking lots and stuff. Telegraph District is one of them that, comes to mind. Is there an organization that's keeping an eye on that?
Any new structure goes through the planning process, the zoning process. If the city, if it meets existing rules, it's called building by right. Because you don't have to ask permission if your project doesn't ask for any help and doesn't require any variances or special treatment. And a whole lot of construction is handled on the private sector because the sale and purchase of land is in a private sector mode, and once you own the land, you may do whatever the law permits. And the law at the moment doesn't say that I know of. It says you have to have a setback, right? It doesn't say that you have to plant grass or have a green space. You can have a setback and it can be concrete. We can, so that you could have that, but we don't stand up and say, you can't do that. And one of the reasons is people want to be free to do what they want to do. And that's hard to say. So, no, there isn't one saying, you know, we're a watchdog to object if that happens. I think our planning department keeps a good eye on that. We do have some rules that are helpful, and Lincoln's been good on it. It's called no net rise, and it says you don't get to do something to the land that increases the flood level. You can't, you have to, when you build, you can't build in a way that creates more flood danger than what's there on your land now. So, for example, you have to build in some places a foot above the ground for any habitable space. Or you have to get some kind of an offset if you're going to dig deep, go down, and therefore take up, you know, flood protection because you're digging deep down. Then you've got to find a place where you offset that so that you can create that space. One of the things that we've done well, we've got 20 locations like the Haymarket parking lot where water can go. We have created those. We probably need more. I've used up more than the amount of time than you bargained for when you came tonight, and how much I was told I was responsible for.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, rock star. David, amazing presentation. Thank you so much for bringing this information to the public. I want to reinforce how important the Salt Creek Resiliency Study is, and it's not that hard to read. It doesn't take very long to read, but it has a potent amount of information. The thing that's coming down the pipe that you're alluding to is the Salt Creek feasibility study, which is another piece of science that will point us in the right direction. Whatever science tells us to do, you know, we need to do that. So I really appreciate your presentation. Thank you so much for being here for all these years and knowing as much as you do. Very much appreciated.
We need a whole lot more, but thank you.
Thank you. I almost said Senator Landis. Thank you, Mr. Landis. Appreciate it. This is the last of our four-part series, and we appreciate your coming tonight. Be sure to have a cookie, and if you want to, you can just take a walk really slowly around the church, and it's still bright enough to see the beautiful gardens.